Chairwoman Waters, Ranking Member McHenry, and other members of the House Financial Services Committee, thank you for the invitation to testify today on appraisal bias and reform, an issue which affects millions of people across the country. My name is Lisa Rice. I'm the President and CEO of the National Fair Housing Alliance. Representing over 170 local fair housing groups, NFHA's goal is to eliminate all forms of housing discrimination and ensure equitable housing opportunities for all people and communities. NFHA, along with Dane Law and the Christensen Law Firm, issued a groundbreaking review of the appraisal standards and appraisal qualification criteria to examine if there was evidence of potential bias in a study commissioned by the Appraisal Subcommittee. We also had the honor of briefing the PAVE Interagency Task Force on several occasions and applaud their comprehensive action plan. For most Americans, the home is their single most important asset and holds the key to wealth, stability, and opportunity for their families. But America's long history of discriminatory housing policies has undervalued homes for people of color and entrenched an unfounded association between race and risk. Today, the black-white homeownership gap is larger than it was when the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. And the wealth gap between white households and households of color remains large and persistent. The Fair Housing Act's promise of fair and equitable housing is unfulfilled. We have all heard the shocking stories of appraisal bias from across the country, including stories of whitewashing, where homeowners of color have had to go through the excruciating experience of removing all evidence of their racial identity just to receive a fair appraisal. From Carlette Duffy in Indiana, who received an increase of almost $150,000 after asking a white friend to pose as her brother, to the Austin family in California, who received an increase of almost $500,000 after asking a white friend to pose as the homeowner. These disturbing and even heartbreaking stories have shone a light on the serious shortcomings in the appraisal process. While some may say that these are just a bad few apples, researchers from a variety of backgrounds using a variety of data sets and methodologies all come to the same conclusion. The current appraisal system leads to adverse outcomes for borrowers of color on a systemic basis. So far, these racial and ethnic disparities cannot be explained by legitimate non-discriminatory factors. Congress must address bias in the valuation process and the urgent need for reform. Based on our research and outreach to fair housing, appraisal, and lending groups, researchers, and academics, we respectfully offer the following recommendations for your consideration. The appraisal industry has long operated in a relatively closed, self-regulated framework which has imposed burdens on consumers as well as small businesses. Congress should encourage the Appraisal Foundation, or TAF, to improve its processes. Congress should also develop the bold vision outlined in the Fair Appraisal and Inequity Reform Act, which would elevate the Appraisal Subcommittee to a new federal agency. To address the risk of broad discretion and underfunded enforcement efforts, Congress should encourage TAF to revise the appraisal standards. Congress should also provide the Federal Valuation Agency with rulemaking authority for the standards and ensure adequate funding under the Fair Housing Initiatives program. Congress should encourage the appropriate regulators to promulgate the automated valuation rule. Congress should also provide the Federal Valuation Agency with rulemaking authority to ensure all valuation methods are fair, unbiased, transparent, and consistent. To address appraiser shortages and lack of diversity, Congress should encourage TAF to revise the appraiser criteria. Congress should also provide the Federal Valuation Agency with rulemaking authority to set reasonable criteria, require comprehensive fair housing training, and require national registration with a unique ID. Finally, to improve research, compliance, and enforcement, Congress should encourage the regulators to immediately enter into a data sharing agreement and should provide the CFPB with rulemaking authority to develop a public valuation database. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to answering your questions.